Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I want to chat with you guys a little bit about doing tens as back off work after maxes and why this can be a beneficial strategy. And when I say things like this, these are strategies I've used personally, stuff I use with some of my clients, a lot of my clients, not necessarily all of them, and it doesn't mean that this is the way that I train or say that you have to train year round. And I want to make that very, very clear because it seems sometimes when people put out information on certain tools or I say, hey, this is a phenomenal tool to use, people seem to think that anytime they see me not using it that I've changed my mind. And that's not the way that training works. We have a lot of really valuable tools that we don't necessarily use all the time. In fact, if we tried to use every beneficial tool, like really amazing training tool, all at the same time every week, you'd probably be lifting weights for 60 hours a week just trying to work all of them in at least once. Okay, and that's just not doable. But I like this strategy, and what you guys have seen me do frequently is with the same lift. And I'm not saying that you even have to do it with the same lift. This actually works reasonably well, even if you do different lifts, variations of the lift, completely different exercises. I know at one time, if you guys look, what I was frequently doing when I was had first pulled this over 600 the first time on camera. What was I doing at the time? I was doing back off work after max pulls, tens with glute bridges, hip thrusts, good mornings, right? Rows. Doesn't necessarily have to be these lifts, but it can be very beneficial to do them with these lifts. And one of the big perks of that is that we have fresh current maxes. In other words, because you've hit a heavy single, a training max, or even a true one at max on a lift, you have fresh data to work with. And what people need to remember, it's not that a closed grip bench press with chains, for example, works dramatically different muscles than, say, a floor press. There's some variation, but they're still working the same basic muscles, right? Similar stabilizers, some differences in the strength curve, the ratios of the primary movers, with pecs, anterior deltoids, triceps, right? There's some differences in there, but the same basic muscles are being used. But let's come over to the idea. What's going on here? Why do we max out? Well, we max out for several reasons. Number one, we max out to practice maxing, and that's a skill that carries over. If you get good at maxing out on 6 or 7 different lifts, you're going to be decent at maxing out on any lift that you try. Now, that's not always true if it's something that requires a unique bar path, but if you've done rep work practicing on that movement, such as, for example, you guys saw me doing inclining, and my maxes were really, really bad early on. And as I started doing more rep work in it, I learned my groove just from doing the rep work. And it's not that the form itself carries over, it's that you realize that different bar paths and touch points, you're just stronger. You can move the bar faster, in which case that carries over to your maxes. But maxing itself is a skill. It's about the skill in learning how to ramp up, right? And getting into the groove as you ramp up. And there's the intramuscular coordination and everything involved, which is what we need in order to recruit maximum force, right? We need that. In order to recruit maximum force, we need to lift maximum weight. And there is a difference in what occurs in the muscle tissue as a result of it. There's also the confidence end of it. So there's a lot of reasons we max out. But one of the big perks, even from a hypertrophy perspective, and it's hard to get guys to grasp this, they'll say, oh, it's not useful for hypertrophy. It totally is. Or they'll say it's not worth it for hypertrophy. Well, what do you mean worth it? Maxing is not particularly risky. Like, I've never understood this concept. If you're a good coach or a good lifter and you know how to train, you should not be afraid of maxing out. You should be competent in your ability to do so safely. Okay? And if you aren't, then you have a lot left to learn. You're just barely scratching the surface of training knowledge. If you're not at that level, my God, you have years and years and years of massive amounts of learning. And we all still learn, including me. I don't know everything. I still always learn. But the maxing out also recruits upper threshold muscle fibers. It recruits everything. And people need to understand that. You'll get some lifters who don't understand that when you take a big set to all-out failure, that last rep, what occurs there, you're doing the same thing on a 1 rep max in terms of muscle fiber recruitment, motor units, and everything else. You are firing everything just as hard on a max as you do with an all-out set to failure, to where you're grinding the last rep and then maybe you even miss the one next. You're doing the same thing. All right, that rep itself is a very, very, very high quality rep. In fact, that last rep is possibly the most hypertrophic rep out of the set. I'm not saying that it's necessary for maximum growth, but it's a very efficient rep. Well, what you've done when you've attenuated all these upper threshold fibers, you've already hit them once and fatigued them. So what happens as a result of that, when you're doing your rep work afterwards for the same muscles, what do you think happens? Those upper threshold fibers have already been subjected to something like a set to failure already. And then you're re-hitting them again with the rep work as you get towards the limit sets, the higher threshold of the percentage of your max. In other words, on a 10 rep max, as you start getting close to 10 reps, or on a 5 rep max, as you start getting close to the 5 reps, right? We're re-hitting those same upper threshold fibers again. Well, we've already hit them once. So it actually produces a larger training response. In other words, if you came in and did 3 sets of 5 or 3 sets of 10 or whatever with a given weight, you're going to get a larger training response if you've done a max first for the entirety of the session. Right? Then we come over to the hypertrophy end. 10s with moderate volume are actually very easy to recover from. They're very time efficient, very easy to recover from. Well, oftentimes we've used up a decent amount of time ramping to a max. That can be a time consuming process at times at the gym. And so if you want to be very efficient with the rest of your training, something like 3 sets of 10 for back off work on a similar exercise or the same exercise, particularly done at appropriate weights for the reps, can produce a very, very large training response. But it does so in a way that doesn't further beat you up. Because it's something I addressed in another video on this. It should have been very recent. One of the issues we run into with doing a bunch of heavy reps, very heavy reps, they tend to beat us up. We can't handle very much of it. And we can't. And anyone who says they can, well, you're probably not lifting that heavy. Like a lot of guys who are saying, well, I'm doing my 10 sets of 3. Well, that's fine. And I've even written 10 sets of 3 protocols in the past. You're probably not going that heavy. Now, 3 sets of 3, you're probably going real heavy. You're actually getting junk reps early on at a 10 by 3. You're just facilitating some speed. You're doing similar on a lot of the early sets to what we're doing with speed work. Right? That's basically what you're doing. But all of that comes at a price. It comes at a price of beating you up. But the advantage is we're dealing with heavier weight. That improves intramuscular coordination, your ability to lift heavier, all these things. But you did kind of get that with the 1 rep max to a larger extent. So we lose some of the benefit, or I'm not saying lose it completely, but it does offset it. And the more often you max, the less benefit you're going to get from doing the really, really heavy rep work. 10s, on the other hand, not really interfering. We're dealing at this point with something that is just purely hypertrophy. There's not a lot of positive neurological gains to be made with 10 rep sets. And that's fine. That's fine. We're doing it generally for purely hypertrophy, and in some cases it's a bit of conditioning. Let's just come over to the other end of the spectrum. But again, it allows us to do so in a way that doesn't quite beat us up the same. Again, it's relatively easy to recover from sets of 10, even challenging sets of 10 on a squat. They might feel grueling when you're doing them, mine do, but you recover very, very fast. You don't get beat up from them. I don't generally get DOMs and things on most muscles, even from really hard sets of 10. It just doesn't happen. You don't get nearly as sore as you do with 3s and 5s, things like that. So what we get is a way to very efficiently stimulate hypertrophy on the backside of our maxes. And that's it. That's all it comes down to. It's an efficient way to hypertrophy after doing maxes in a way that doesn't beat us up. Makes it a valuable training tool. Makes it a very valuable training tool because at the end of the day, a bigger muscle is a stronger muscle, and you'd have to get enough training volume into hypertrophy. And if you can hypertrophy maximally and you're doing maxes, guess what? You're going to maximize your total strength potential. You're going to maximize your total strength potential. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.